Take a look at these old Soviet propaganda posters. They depict an idealized version of Soviet womanhood. Powerful, equal, heroic, at least on paper. According to Marxist-Leninist ideology, women were equal builders of socialism. But that wasn't the full story. It was complicated. Look at this map here. It shows how the German army tore through Soviet territory in the summer of 1941 during Operation Barbarossa, a surprise invasion of the Soviet Union with over 3 million Axis soldiers. The largest military operation in history. The Red Army was unprepared. Entire Soviet divisions were surrounded and crushed. In just the first few months, the USSR lost over 3 million soldiers, killed, wounded, or captured. The Soviet Union was fighting for survival. And suddenly, equality wasn't just theory anymore. It was necessity. During the Second World War, around 800,000 women served in the Soviet armed forces, about 5% of total personnel. Here's something interesting. This is an old Soviet film Chapayev from 1934. The film featured a heroic female machine gunner, Anka. Female soldiers weren't something new. During the First World War and the Russian Civil War, thousands served. However, by the 1930s, social attitudes grew more conservative, and women were pushed out of combat roles. This changed after the Nazi invasion in 1941, when the government revived symbols like Anka. She wasn't real, but she mattered. When war broke out again, the USSR needed real anchors. That's Roza Shanina, a Soviet sniper who was credited with over 50 kills. She had just graduated when the Nazis invaded. Within 2 years, she would be on the front line with a rifle and a mission. I think her story tells you something the propaganda posters left out. We'll get back to her later. The Soviet Union claimed to be the first country to achieve true gender equality. From the Bolshevik Revolution, women were told they were equal citizens. Women voted. They joined the workforce. They were called builders of socialism, essential to the Soviet project. But there was a catch. From Tsarist times to the Bolshevik era, military service was widely seen as a male duty. Even revolutionary feminists rarely challenged the idea that violence was inherently male. Before the war, women were often pushed into traditional roles: nurses, teachers, mothers. The German invasion in 1941 changed everything, and the Soviet Union allowed women to serve in combat roles. Take a look at this group. The USSR was the only country to allow women to fly combat missions, forming famous regiments like the Night Witches. While these female units were used in Soviet propaganda, public recognition was rare and inconsistent. At the start of the war, enemy soldiers mocked the presence of Soviet women in combat, seeing it as a sign of desperation. But as female soldiers proved themselves capable, attitudes shifted to fear and hatred. Nazi ideology, rooted in strict gender roles, labeled these women as unnatural, fueling violent reprisals. After the Nazi invasion, young women started showing up at recruitment offices. Many had lost brothers, fathers, or entire villages to the advancing Wehrmacht. Take a look at this poster. This is Komsomol, the Communist Youth League. They turned school kids into party members, and in wartime into soldiers. Early in the war, Soviet propaganda and Komsomol promoted female soldiers to enlist. Although women were legally allowed to volunteer, military leadership held mixed views. While Soviet propaganda and Komsomol campaigns actively promoted female enlistment early in the war, the military command often resisted it in practice. Many women were turned away or discouraged, and only gained entry after repeated applications. This contradiction reveals a broader pattern. Women were celebrated as patriotic symbols, but not always accepted as real soldiers, unless the Red Army's desperation left no other choice. In 1942, as casualties mounted, the Soviet Party leadership officially opened combat roles to women. There were requirements. You had to be between 18 and 26, unmarried, healthy, politically loyal, and preferably Russian. Some girls were just 16, and they lied. While rhetoric emphasizing patriotism and devotion to Stalin was common, female veterans often described deeply personal reasons for joining, to avenge loved ones, or simply to be near them at the front. There was no single reason, but their stories share a common thread: sacrifice and determination. Let's go back to Roza Shanina. Rosa was born in 1924 in northern Russia to a working-class family. Determined to get an education, she walked 200 kilometers through the taiga at age 14 to study, despite her parents' objections. She joined the Komsomol youth movement in 1938 and graduated college in 1942. Rosa volunteered after her brother was killed in Leningrad. She was just a teenager. Rosa applied multiple times, and when she was finally accepted into the elite women's sniper school, she graduated with honors and immediately turned down an instructor's post. Why? She wanted the front. She wanted the war. Roza Shenina was described as an independent woman of strong will and bright spirit. Modest and athletic, she enjoyed volleyball. Her values centered on courage and humility. Roza Shenina quickly gained a reputation at the Sniper Academy for her precision, especially her ability to hit 2 targets in rapid succession, known as doublets. At the front, she would crawl at dawn through muddy trenches to reach a camouflage sniper post overlooking German positions. As she later wrote, the unconditional requirement to outwit the enemy and kill him became an irrevocable law of my hunt. In one instance, she outsmarted a German cuckoo sniper hidden in a tree by waiting until dusk, when the fading light backlit the branches and exposed his nest. Roza Shenina was a wartime celebrity. Soviet newspapers praised her sniper skills. She received the Order of Glory, and foreign media called her the unseen terror of East Prussia. Here's something interesting. During the war, Rosa kept a secret diary. It wasn't supposed to exist. Soldiers weren't allowed to write them. That's one of Shenina's notebooks. In it, she left behind something rare: a first-person record of a Soviet female soldier wrestling with death, love, loneliness, and ideology. Rosa's diaries are fascinating to read. The entries offer a stark contrast to the polished propaganda images of fearless female warriors. Her story reveals a far more complicated reality. In her diary, Rosa mourned the death of a man she loved, struggled with feelings for another, described sexual harassment, and detailed the conditions on the front lines and the horrors of war. She wrote,
"People all around were hit and torn to pieces. I nearly vomited at all of the body parts."
In her diary, She also confessed she felt of no use to anyone. Rosa Shanina remained humble about her reputation, once writing that she had been overrated. In her diary, she reflected,
What I've actually done? No more than I have to as a Soviet person, having stood up to defend the motherland.
She also expressed a deeper belief in collective purpose, writing,
The essence of my happiness is fighting for the happiness of others. It's strange. Why is it that in grammar, the word happiness can only be singular? That is counter to its meaning, after all. If it turns necessary to die for the common happiness, then I'm braced to.
By January 1945, Rosa was part of the brutal East Prussian campaign. She had already survived sniper duels, artillery, and frostbite. Then she was hit, fatally. She died the next day. I think Rosa's story tells something deeper about how the Soviet war machine used women. The official Soviet line was that women like Rosa were patriotic heroes. But in practice, although women were officially permitted to serve in combat roles during the war, Soviet military leadership often discouraged their active participation on the front lines. This was especially true for snipers like Roza Shenina. Let me explain. It was partly practical and partly political. Female casualties posed a concern for morale and public perception. Military authorities were wary of how the deaths of young women would be received both within the ranks and back home. In several cases, commanders issued orders to relocate women to safer positions or administrative duties. Roza Shenina resisted these efforts. She submitted multiple written requests, including directly to Joseph Stalin, asking to remain in combat. The military told her to step back. She didn't, and she wasn't the only one. A lot of women pushed to stay in combat, even when the system pushed back. Roza Shenina's story highlights a contradiction. She was celebrated, but controlled. Her life, like that of many Soviet women in uniform, was treated as temporary and politically flexible. But when you zoom in, what you see isn't just a sniper. It's a system that needed women, while never truly recognizing them as equals. On the front lines, the risk of death was constant, but so was harassment, not just from the enemy, but from their own side. Female soldiers were often mocked, degraded, or labeled as field wives, a Soviet euphemism implying they were little more than mistresses to male officers. In one of her diary entries, Roza Shenina described being harassed by a commanding officer in a new regiment.
Went to reconnaissance in Regiment 785. Wonderful guys, well received. But started to get harassed by the head of the regiment, chasing me when I had done nothing, grabbing at me like he was in a brothel. I could not stand him, and left after only staying 2 days. It was impossible to live there anymore.
You'd think that after bleeding for their country, Soviet women who served would come home to medals, parades, and respect. They didn't. When the war ended, female soldiers came home not to praise, but to silence, and often stigma. Most were excluded from victory parades. Women in specialized roles like snipers and pilots were more likely to be recognized, while those in infantry were often overlooked or erased from the narrative. Most were left out of the official story, told to get back to their place. A staggering number suffered PTSD, lived in poverty, or were forced to hide their past. And it wasn't just social rejection. In 1944, even before the war ended, Stalin issued a new family policy that made the message clear. Women were no longer warriors, they were mothers again. The Soviet state began reasserting traditional gender roles, fast. For decades, Soviet women at the front were left out of the official story until the Soviet Union collapsed. Thought this was interesting. In 1985, Belarusian journalist Svetlana Alexievich began interviewing hundreds of female veterans. The result was a book called The Unwomanly Face of War, a rare account told entirely through their voices. They didn't talk about strategy. They talked about lice, hunger, fear, and the awkward silence when they came home. It was one of the first times the emotional weight of women's service had been put front and center. Since then, interest in these stories has grown. Historians have revisited the archives. Families have shared diaries and photos. New books and films have brought some of these women back into the public conversation, not as propaganda symbols, but as people, complicated, brave, and often forgotten. Today, women in the Russian military play a limited role. Although approximately 40,000 serve, most are restricted to non-combat positions. Cultural attitudes, institutional barriers, and traditional gender norms continue to shape the Russian military's approach. As Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine grinds on, the Kremlin has ramped up efforts to recruit women, offering pay, benefits, and even early release for female prisoners in exchange for military service. But behind the glossy propaganda lies a darker truth. Many of these women are being used as cannon fodder, victims of a system that exploits both poverty and patriotism